Hello, this is Christian, and let's draw something interesting. Today I want to talk about forests, and specifically coniferous forests or evergreen forests. When you're doing fantasy maps, it's good to be able to draw jungles, deciduous forests, and evergreen forests, at least like those three types of thing, so that you can have sort of a look that looks like this, where it's looks like a northern forest or an alpine forest hugging the side of a mountain, or something that looks a little bit more like this, like a leafy green type of forest. Lots of different looks that you can achieve depending on the techniques that you use. This is me experimenting with the type of forest that Jonathan Roberts uses. His name is Torstan on Cartographers Guild. He also goes by Fantastic Maps on YouTube and Twitter and Google Plus, and he's the guy who did the cool maps for the Game of Thrones map pack, Lands of Ice and Fire, which are awesome and lots of fun. I wanted to show a couple different techniques of doing some mountains, just to show that there. I said mountains. I've been doing a lot of mountains lately. This time I want to do a couple different techniques of how to do forests, and show you that there's no wrong way or right way to do a forest. Just as long as it looks right to you on your map, and it conveys the idea that there's trees there, trees that are more numerous there than they are elsewhere. And so let's look at some ways to do this. You can do what I used to do, which is a kind of forest that is very clearly demarcated, if that's a word. It's clearly drawn with, let's see, let's get this pen down in size here. So I'm going to draw a tree, an evergreen looking tree, and I'm going to draw another evergreen tree behind it, and I'm just going to draw a few of these, and by putting these trees together I'm starting to form a little bit of a forest here. You don't have to go crazy with the detail. Sometimes you can get a little carried away. Once you have the front end of the forest going, how do you do the back end? Well, you don't want to make the trees, just as big, because that's going to make this look like a grove in between. What you want to do is you want to be like, oh, look, the trees are real small on the back side. Why are they so small on the back side? Well, there's a whole bunch of solid trees in the middle here, so you're not going to see them. So you have these nice tall trees in front and little tree tops in the background. And then to sell the look even more, maybe you throw a little treetop here, a little treetop there, maybe a couple little bitty treetops in the middle, and you get yourself a forest. So you can throw, if you want to be a little more, this is more of a pen and ink style here that I'm doing. If I'm adding these little shaders in here, these little detail lines, what I'm saying is that maybe this is going to be a line art kind of map that's not going to have a lot of gray tone. Maybe this is meant to be at the front of a novel or something that'll be printed in pure black and white, and so they won't have much ability to put gray tone in there. So I'm adding tone by doing stippling, just throwing in some little dots here and there to give it, each of these trees, a little bit of a sort of a shade look to them. So I'm forming a forest. If I want to then give myself a little, just throw a little regular layer down here, get my small shader, and maybe make it a little bit bigger. And I always make the color of my forests way too bright. Some of you, like professionals, might have looked at those forests that I had already drawn here down below are like, oh my god, my eyes, my eyes. That's, I get a little carried away with the coloring, and that's an exercise that I'm trying to work on personally, is to go with a more subtle coloring, more subtle shading of color on my forests and grasslands and stuff. So just throwing some color in here, and I've got myself a nice little coniferous forest. The whole point is you're trying to go for that pointy look. These forests here, this is just me playing around with a brush that I was working on. I can show you that. This brush is a conifer brush 1 and 2 here. I'll show you this one. And the way this works is I don't do a lot of pattern brushes like this. I draw most stuff freehand, but if I wanted to throw down a texture like that in there, I figured I might as well make a brush that would do some kind of texture like that. So the way that works is I have it tied to pressure sensitivity, so I can make little treetops like that, or bigger treetops like this. And how did I create that brush? I created that brush in Procreate down in my, here we go. In here, brushes and textures. This is me just creating different brushes. And it's one of these brushes down here. So I made a brush like that, and then I put some shade on it, put some more shade on it, and I just exported this image to the clipboard and the iPad, and then brought that image in the shape source here, and then I adjusted the dynamics and everything so that I'd be able to have it be pressure sensitive. So this is a quick, sort of crude way of throwing down a bunch of forest. And then if I wanted some nice sort of highlights in the trees, get a nice sort of light green color, and it looks a little bit more like a snowy forest if you kind of don't blink too much. Now, the way that Torsten likes to do this when he does his coniferous forests is he does this cool technique where he has these little very vertical picked out trees along the border. And so a quick way of laying that sort of thing down is doing something like this. On a layer for color, I'm going to just get a nice sort of shady tinting kind of brush. Let's see what this does here. Okay, that is not the kind of shading that I wanted. I want this one here. Okay, yeah. So this is going to give me a nice sort of solid blockiness. So it's like, okay, here's forest, nice irregular border, and then say, okay, here's another forest over here. So I'm just drawing forest by drawing patches of green, right? So then I can go in and pick my one of my pens here, and on my inks layer, I can come in and start throwing those little vertical lines showing where I've got little trees on the borders, and I'm doing them sort of light on the front side and a little bit heavier on the back side. So I'm picking out the border here so that this now looks like not a patch of color that I've just laid down, but it actually looks like a forest I was planning to color in. And again, on the back side of this forest, I'm making these smaller, right? They're going to be taller trees, thicker bottoms on the front side that you can see, and then smaller, just little treetops on the back side, because that's all you're going to be able to see is just the little tip of the treetop on the backside. And then maybe you've got a few little treetops here and there in the middle of the forest. Kind of going across here and there. I get a little carried away on that stuff sometimes. And if it's a little extreme, just swipe through it, pull away some of that detail. So you're generating a forest, and then you can go ahead and maybe use a brush like the conifer brush that I created, like this one, and pick a nice green, find a color that works for you, and then just kind of come in and give this patch of forest that spiky conifer look. And then maybe give it a little bit of the light green and try to maybe concentrate the light green in patches, or concentrate the light green along the front edge of things. Like that. And then how do you really get this dimensionality? You need to go back to our good old friend highlight and shadow. So I'm going to create an overlay layer that I'm going to put underneath the inks and above the color. And I'm going to do the same overlay shadowing technique that I used when I was doing these mountains in the previous video. You're just treating this as if it should be a three-dimensional object. So I'm going to go ahead and take my shader, check on the size, opacity, and I'm just going to use this to lay down shadow. So this little part here is going to be in shadow, and then this little part here is going to be in shadow, and then this is going to cast a shadow. So that's what I'm doing here. This is in shadow, and this is casting shadow. Like that. In shadow, and then casting a little bit of a shadow. So the moment you start throwing shadow on it, your eye starts to say, hey, that's really popping out. That's looking kind of three-dimensional. We switch over to pure white on the same overlay layer, and we're going to control this very precisely here, and we're just going to give it a little bit of highlight on these front edges where the sun would be shining a little bit more, especially near the top. Little bits of highlight. And so one of the reasons you do this sort of wavy look and don't just draw a forest as a big oval is so it gives you an opportunity to put in bits of highlight. See, the more little waves I have here, the more excuses I have to put little shadows in here, and it's going to look more three-dimensional. And so that's how this one looks a little bit nicer. I spent a little bit more time on this. As you can see here, I threw in a little bit more shadow in patches in the middle, and I used a little bit more textury looking shadow around the outside. And then up here, very similar look. It almost looks like just a big fuzzy green carpet, and it gives the appearance of being a nice alpine style forest. Thanks for watching, and next time I'll talk more about the deciduous style forests.